one that you hear the most about. But there are over 200 different types of dementias, which is always very surprising when I tell people. So we have other types of dementia, Lewy body dementia, we have vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, we have Parkinson's associated dementia, we have HIV related dementia, we have alcohol related dementia. We have some other types of dementia that are so rare, Huntington's disease and what have you. So is this something that you knew before, or is this something that is extremely new to you? Did you know that we had over 200 types of dementia? I think whenever I say that, people are so shocked, like, whoa. Yes. So let's look at what you will find. Let me even ask you, what do you think the signs and symptoms of dementia are? Well, let me go back so that you know. So what are some of the signs and symptoms of dementia? Yes.
I think there will be some emotions.
Emotions, okay. Wonderful, wonderful. Any other responses?
Maybe just remember
About your life. Good. Wonderful. Oh yes, we have some excellent. That's a very good one. Any other things? Okay. Thank you so much. You've done all your homework. So I'll take it off. But every time we talk about dementia, the number one things that happened, she and I were from Leicester. So Leicester people are right on this one. The number one signs and symptom that everyone tends to talk about is memory loss. But memory loss is not synonymous with dementia. So memory loss does not mean someone has dementia. And there are several types of dementias that memory loss is not the first thing that you're going to see. It's changes in behavior. So thank you very much for that. It's usually changes in people's emotions, changes in their personality. So I made mention of one type of dementia, frontotemporal dementia. And that type of dementia, funny enough, people don't even lose their memories until much later on. Normally what tends to happen is they start to have behavior that is very different. So they might struggle with regulating their emotions. You might find out that sometimes people would say they are being very aggressive. So essentially they might not really be able to logically understand some of the things that are happening. And that makes them sometimes have periods of agitation or aggressiveness. So one thing that I always want to say is memory loss is not synonymous to dementia. It's when we say Alzheimer's dementia, it's the first one that you see with Alzheimer's dementia, but it's not the only sign and symptom of dementia. So we're looking at things like changes in mood, behavior, and temperament. So temperament just means looking at how someone is normally. How are they? Some people are very gentle, very loving, and some people are very boisterous, very active. So everyone is very different. So if you find someone who is very active, very talkative like me, and all of a sudden the person is very calm, very moody. Again, you would say, oh, finally they shut up. But it might just be that they're having a change in temperament. So we also have problems with language. So sometimes people struggle to find their words. Has it ever happened to you where you're desperately trying to say something and that word is not coming? Has that ever happened to anyone? Okay. For the people who are wearing glasses, in my country we say the people with 4 eyes. So the people with glasses, have you ever had your glass on top of your head and then you were looking for it? And you were looking everywhere. Right. That doesn't mean you have dementia. Let me just make that clear. But it means that sometimes you're going to have problems with finding things. And that's perfectly normal. It happens to everyone. But when you start to have prolonged problems, that's when it probably should start cueing you in. So we have word finding difficulties. We have difficulty with concentrating. So if you're watching a movie with a loved one, for instance, and then the person cannot follow the plot, so they cannot know from A to B what has happened, and they keep asking you the same questions as if it's all new information, sometimes you might start to think, what could possibly be happening? I'm not saying that it's dementia, but sometimes it starts in this form. Then it's memory loss. So memory loss is the one that everyone knows around. Usually it starts with people getting lost, being familiar places. So So it's not just unfamiliar places, it's someone in their own home, but they don't know the difference between the kitchen and the toilet, and they cannot find their way in their home. Sometimes the individual has lived there for 30 years, but they still can't find their way. And other times, it's that the person goes outside, but whilst outside, they get lost. So they might call you and say, oh, I don't know what happened, I don't know why I'm here. And again, it usually doesn't start off as very, very frank, and when I say very frank, the difference isn't that much. Now, how many of us here have iPhones or mobile phones? Everyone here does. Periodically, do you receive something that says kindly update? Do iPhones are notorious for that? It always sends you something, please update your phone overnight, please do this. When someone is living with dementia, sometimes it means that their brain doesn't update itself. So new information is not stored. So it means they rely on old information. So what it would mean is, let me go back to that example of the person who used to go out. The person has probably understood, okay, so I'm going to do this, I'm going to do shopping, I'm going to the city center. The person leaves their house, takes the bus, gets to the city center, but the brain hasn't updated to say, you are at the city center. So the person technically is still thinking, oh, I'm at home. But home does not look like where I am right now. So that means the person is confused. What's happening right now? Let me give another example. Has anyone ever traveled and was so tired, maybe slept or woke up and did not know where they were? Has that ever happened to you? How did you feel? Very scared. What's happening? What's happening? And then your brain updates itself and you're, oh, okay, yes, that's happening. But with people who are living with dementia, sometimes they live in that perpetual state of not knowing what's happening, what's happening, what's happening. Right. Then we have hallucinations. And this is the part where if we don't have enough information, we start to look at it from the lens of spirituality. And we say the person has been possessed or that the person is mad. Right. So what are hallucinations? Simply put, it's when people see things that other people cannot see, but the person is seeing them. So let me put this into context. Now, when your brain is impaired, sometimes it can misinterpret signals. And aside from misinterpreting signals is also the fact that the brain will automatically bring out things that aren't there. I'll give you an example. Sometimes someone will be shouting, oh, there's fire on the roof, for instance. And everyone else looks up and sees there's no fire on the roof. Now, our reality, there's no fire on the roof, versus that person's reality, there's fire on the roof. The person is actually seeing fire because their brain is misinterpreting cues and is presenting fire to them. So their brain is telling them there's fire, but everyone else will say, no, there's no fire, please sit down. And the person says, no, there's fire, I have to leave. Sit down, there's no fire. Let me ask, if we had all the doors closed, right, and there was fire on the roof, what do you think we would all do? We won't sit still. Everyone would be trying to get out. So when a person who is living with dementia, for instance, is saying, I need to leave this place because there's fire on the roof, and we tell the person, sit down, we really aren't doing anything because we are arguing against their reality, because they actually are seeing those things. Then we also have delusions, where sometimes people believe things that are not true, but we cannot convince them otherwise.
Yeah, so that my grandmother didn't have a delusion about her son doing
My grandma had dementia as well, and she used to accuse me of stealing her plate. And every time I say this, people are laughing, but it was no laughing matter. There was a day she wanted to report me to the police. I must have been about 10 years old, and she was like, you little thief, I'm going to do something about this. So the thought behind that is sometimes when your memory is impaired, you place something here, you come back, it's not there. It could have been, and in lots of cases, my grandma put the plate elsewhere, and she couldn't find it. But if she couldn't find it, she would look around and she would think, who is always here in this house with me? Ah, it's you. So you are the one who took it. So in this case, your brother is the one who took her money. So in that instance, But delusion sometimes is more harmful because a person might think family are trying to kill me, family are trying to poison me. So what am I going to do? I'm going to stop eating. So they won't eat the food that you prepare, and it can become very, very difficult and very complicated. And we also have increased anxiety and another condition we call apathy. So that's a loss of interest. So the person is not interested in doing anything at all. And then this inhibition in speech. So this inhibition in speech just means they lose their filter. So if they see anyone, anything at all, they're going to say it. See someone who is slightly overweight, they'll mention it. And I know obviously from a cultural stance, people can be very blunt, but this is even more blunt than blunt, right? So for instance, there was a day my grandma saw this lady who had just given birth. And my grandma said, "Oh my God, you're almost like an elephant now." And then, obviously, that's not acceptable. The person has just given birth, even if the person has put on some weight, that's not the way you talk to the person. But she was like, "Oh my God, you're almost an elephant now. What have you been doing?" So now let's look at some of the signs and symptoms that affect the physical body. The very first thing sometimes is loss or increased appetite. So for some people, they're going to eat a lot. For some other people, they're not going to eat as much. Essentially what's happening is the brain again is responsible for letting you know when you're full. In some people, there's that filter or that mechanism starts not working. So they'll eat and eat and eat. Added to the fact that they don't even have a memory of having eaten, it becomes difficult. So they may just have finished eating, but when you're coming to eat, they'll say, "Where's my food?" And you tell them, "Well, you just ate." They say, "No, I didn't eat. You're starving me. Bring me my food." And the person can eat and eat and eat. And the same works in the opposite direction where the person hasn't eaten, but again, they have no memory of not having eaten. And when you tell them that you've eaten, they tell you, "No, I have eaten." So you can't convince them otherwise. And we have problems with mobility. Now, I must say that for most people, this is something that comes much later. So at the beginning, they don't have problems with walking around. And then we also have sometimes where people become slower in movement. I was saying earlier that memory loss is not the main symptom of dementia. For some people, it's that they start becoming very slow in their movement, or that they have a high number of falls. So if you find someone who's having problems with coordinating, it's most often present in another type of dementia, Lewy body dementia, where that happens. Then we have fluctuations in alertness. So 1 minute they're very alert, listening, and then the next minute they're sleeping. Sometimes there's also a change where at night the person doesn't sleep at all, and then during the day the person is then snoring. So there's a change in day and night. And difficulty with sequential tasks. So a sequential task is any task that you build upon. I'll ask everyone in the room, how many steps do you think it takes to make a cup of tea? Yeah, so you're saying about 5 steps, which is usually what people say, 5 steps. Are we all in agreement that it's 5 steps? You think there are potentially more? Okay, so would you humbly disagree that there are more steps? Yes. Okay, so how many do you think there are? At least 6. At least 6? Oh, dear, I thought you'd push it a bit more. Okay, anyone else? What do you think? You are more?
Water in the kettle.
Uh-huh.
And then pour in the water. And then make the tea bag in.
Okay.
Back out. Sugar.
Uh-huh.
And stir it.
Okay.
Take the spoon out. 9.
9. Okay. There are about 20 steps. So you were close. You didn't get your kettle to begin with. You just started with boiling the water. You can't boil your water. You need to put water into a container. So first, it begins with you actually going to get the kettle, bring in it, right? You need to open your tap, or whichever source of water you do. You need to put that, either the kettle underneath the tap, or whichever, if you put water into the kettle. It If it's an electric kettle, you need to put it in and press the switch. Right. Then you have to wait for a bit. You have to then go and bring your cup. You have to bring the spoon. Where's your sugar going to come from? The sugar is in a container, isn't it? You need to remove the lid from the sugar. Bring your spoon, scoop the sugar out, put that in, right? Then, if you're like me, you then wait for a bit, right? Then you have to lift the kettle, pour it into the tea. Where's your tea going to come from? You need to go and look for your tea. So bring your tea, take your tea out, tea bag, put it in the cup, right? Leave it for some time for it to steep. Maybe take your tea bag out. I already added my sugar, so I'm going to leave it like that. But then you have to think, milk. So you have to go and look for your milk from wherever it is. Very likely it's going to be in a fridge. Open the fridge, look for the milk, take the milk out, unscrew the top, pour it in, pour it back, put it in the fridge, close the fridge door. You can't leave the fridge door like that, can you? Now you have to come, you have to stir, and then finally you have to sit. So many steps. But if we looked at it, our brain never even registers it. We just think, oh, you just pour that in 6 steps. No, there's so many steps. So anything that is built on the other is known as sequential tasks. So what tends to happen is the brain can only do so much, so it starts to take some of the things out. So the person, for instance, might bring, let's say you visit someone, and the person says, oh, I'm going to make you a cup of tea. Thank you. The person goes to make a cup of tea, except the person has just brought you hot water. And then you ask the person, oh, I wanted tea. They say, yes, but I brought you the tea. But you look inside it and there's no tea. Except, or in some instances, the person brings you something that they think is tea, but really it is a tea bag full of milk. There's no hot water, there's no sugar, there's no nothing. So in these instances, you should start thinking, what might possibly be happening?
Sorry,
Please do.
for the sequential task, does it mean that every task or what about if they overindulge in a particular thing, like for example, they or
Yeah. Yes. So it's skipping steps or not following through with a full step as one would. So it's being stuck in a loop. So it might mean, for instance, that they boil the tea and they keep boiling the tea, and it's like the same. Or even in some instances, the person buys one particular item. So they might buy one food item. Let's say maybe it's noodles that they want to cook. So they buy noodles, and you open their fridge, and there's like 30 different kinds of the same noodle, and you're thinking, what's happening here? So sometimes it just, the person cannot follow through. Or maybe the person is cooking, for instance, and the person brings their work or whatever, but the person doesn't follow any steps. It's just one thing that's stuck on fire. And the person says, oh, and if you ask the person, what are you doing with this? They'll find something to tell you. But sometimes it might not necessarily make the most sense, the most logical sense. So we have this called with sensory processing. So sensory processing means that over time, let me go back. So again, if we're looking at your senses, we have sight, we have hearing, we have feeling, we have about 5. Monkeys, they're saying there's 6. So, but all those areas are dependent on your brain processing everything. So as we are seated here right now, we know that there's a bit of noise from that side. But our brain can tell us where exactly the noise is coming from. And we can hear distinctively all the different voices. So we know that it's different people who are talking. But essentially what happens is when someone is living with dementia, the brain cannot filter out anything. So things become extremely mumbled in the person's brain, and then the person, because it can't filter out everything else, they become overstimulated. So in noisy environments, it can't do very well. So this might mean, for instance, you take the person to a restaurant, and then whilst you're eating, all of a sudden the person gets up, and you're thinking, wait, and no. Or if the television is on and the radio is on and someone is talking, they don't know who is talking from what. And then over time, some people might even start to think, for instance, if they have a TV on, they might think the TV is talking to them. So they might start replying or talking to the TV. So it's all differences with receiving various stimuli and then working out dementia kill a person? It could have been framed in a better way, but the best way to explain that is that in itself, it's not necessarily going to come in and kill you, let me put it that way. But what it means is it presents a number of symptoms that ultimately limits your quality of life. And over time, aids in you dying, if I should put it that way. So let's look, for instance, at difficulty swallowing. You can't really swallow. In some instances, nutrition becomes extremely difficult. In rare circumstances, they might put what they call an NG tube, so in from the nose into the stomach to feed the person. Now, sometimes there's a loss of bowel and bladder control, so the person can't keep their bowel and bladder. They have more falls, so they fall a lot, and over time, some people become completely bedbound. So they are essentially in bed all the time, they nest in bed. And there are problems with communicating. For some people, it comes to a point that completely can't speak. So you can't tell you anything that they want. In those cases, there's another way to communicate with them. Then we have significant problems with memory. And this usually comes in where people can't even recognize their loved ones. Obviously, it doesn't mean that everyone who's living with dementia would ever come to a point of not recognizing their loved one, but a large number of people don't. And sometimes they don't even recognize themselves. If they look in the mirror, they might say, oh, who is this old person talking to me? In reality, it's actually them. Some people might talk to the person in the mirror and say, oh, I've got a friend. I've just made a new friend. Again, it's them. Sometimes they may look at their children and not really recognize that that's their children. Again, because their memory has not updated to say that this is how your child looks right now. So they might see their child, if it's a son, for instance, and think, oh, what a handsome young man. Is he looking for someone to marry? I want to marry him. Very inappropriate, but it's only because the brain hasn't updated to say, oh, this is how your child looks like. And in a lot of cases, they may actually think they're way younger than they are. In this case, it's not uncommon for someone who is about 80 years, for instance, to say, I want to go and see my mom. Or where's my dad? I'm going to school. All of these things. And you know, you're about 85, you're long retired, you're not going to school. But a person will say, oh no, I need to go to school. Where's my school bag? Where's my vest? So we also have behavioral concerns. And this particular one, other people term it wandering. We call it walking with purpose. So essentially, sometimes you find people who are living with dementia and they get up in the morning, they say, okay, today is one of those days. I'm just going to stay at home, I'm not going to do much. But by about midday, or sometimes as the sun is setting, you find them, they're on their way. They start walking. And when I used to work on the ward, we actually used to have a time around 4 to about 6 o'clock where we would get a member of staff just to be on the alert. Because again, most people who are living with dementia, they will start trying to walk. I'm going home. I'm going to see my friend. I'm waiting for the bus. But they are obviously in hospital. So let's look at what causes dementia. Does anyone want me to pause right now? Or shall we go on? Shall we?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, like, dementia can start when at any age, well, at a relatively young age, not necessarily just you're old. At one point, you notice that these symptoms on an old person in relation to their hesitant dementia. Like, for example, if it is a younger person with neurodivergence, there's like a lot of them actually share, I mean, a lot of them is actually very good with some neurodivergence. Would it make it harder for people for a neurodivergent person to be diagnosed for dementia?
It would be. And it's not just with neurodivergence as well as it is with women who are menopausal. Sometimes they might have symptoms of dementia, but because they are within perimenopause, so they might tell them no. For instance, difficulty regulating your emotions, difficulty with concentrating, and the tendency to walk with purpose and things like that. Sometimes the doctors might say, oh no, we think it's menopause. So sadly, yes, those tend to happen. And then in some cases, it's about strongly advocating for yourself and for your loved one to say no. And the other thing that also helps is if you keep a log. So you keep what's called a behavioral chart. So essentially it's writing the signs and symptoms that you have and thinking, because the pathway that we use to diagnose dementia is very different from the pathway used to diagnose neurodivergence, whichever one it is, ADHD, all of these. They are very, very different. But again, it's about how best you're able to present your concerns to whoever you're seeing at the GP, so they take you very seriously, and then they start support for you. The youngest person I've ever supported who was living with dementia was 42. So that's a very young age, and it's quite frightening. But when we look at the causes of dementia, most often than not, it has to do with protein buildup in the brain, or it has to do with damaged blood vessels. So when protein is in the brain, it prevents the transmission of messages from one point of the brain to the other. And obviously this would mean that electrical signals in the form of messages don't get sent. So the person might want to initiate an activity, but the other part of the brain that's supposed to coordinate is not receiving the message. Then we also have other types of dementia, for instance, like vascular dementia, which results from having a stroke. So essentially, the blood vessels, either one, they are damaged. So there's been, we call that ischemia, when there's bleeding or a rupture of a blood vessel at one point, and then blood flows through. Obviously, that's not supposed to be done. The brain is a very delicate organ, and the least trauma disturbs it, and it disturbs it a lot. So it doesn't really like any stress in that way. So we have other things, for instance, narrowing of the blood vessels. So if you have high cholesterol levels, sometimes it can lead to what's known as atherosclerosis, which essentially just means there's a buildup. So the blood vessels, the center is supposed to be free so blood can flow. But if there's a buildup of anything there, the lumen, so the part that the blood flows through, becomes very narrow. So essentially your heart has to do a lot more work. So the heart pumps a lot more and it increases pressure. That's when we say someone has high blood pressure. Now high blood pressure means the pressure that the blood is using, the heart is using to pump the blood through is really high, and over time sometimes it can rupture. But it's not just a full-blown stroke. They have smaller strokes known as transient ischemic attacks, or TIAs. And sometimes these, even though they are strokes, they don't occur in a way that we would typically want, or that we would typically see. So for instance, if I ask signs and symptoms of a stroke, for instance, everyone would be saying, oh, paralysis, slurred speech, facial droop, and all of that. With TIAs, sometimes it doesn't happen that way. You might even, or sometimes people have it in their sleep. So they wake up in the morning, they might see a slight hump in the face. Within a couple of hours, it's gone back. The face is straight. You won't even know that anything has happened. But just because we can't see it doesn't mean that the brain has not registered it. So over time, if you have a number of these smaller strokes, it can lead to having vascular dementia particularly. And the research also does state that most people, at least 25% of people who have a stroke, within 5 years, they develop vascular dementia. So let me go to the risk factors. And thank you very much because you mentioned the number one risk factor for developing dementia. It is age. So the older you get, the higher your risk of getting dementia. So for people who are like 80 plus, it's about 1 in 6 people who do develop dementia. However, I said earlier, I supported someone who was 42. Currently, we're finding that more and more people under the age of 65 are getting diagnosed with dementia. In this case, it's known as young onset dementia or working age dementia, because you would still be in active employment. So we have a lot of people who are laid off by their employers because they have dementia, but they don't even know they have dementia. And because they don't know they have dementia, they're working, but when they are not able to perform properly in their jobs, there's so many complaints. Sometimes they are put on performance management, all of these things, when in actuality, it's dementia. So we have genetic predisposition, where sadly, particularly for Alzheimer's dementia, we have familial dementia. In this case, because there's a genetic predisposition, it's quite difficult to prevent it. We have other things like air pollution, which at the end of the day present toxins in the brain and can lead to death of developing dementia. Then we have the ones or the sort of risk factors that you can change. Interestingly, over 40, I think it's 40 to 45% of dementias could potentially be prevented. So how can you prevent it? We're looking at medical conditions. I made mention of high blood pressure. Once you have stroke, there's a high likelihood, at least 25%, that you will develop vascular dementia. It's things like diabetes and heart disease. Now these are the things we are finding a lot more. Over time, they increase people's risk of developing dementia. But, for instance, high blood pressure. I went to a community event, and then it was organized by the Stroke Association, an organization that supports people who are living with stroke. And at the back, I'm looking at you at the back, but at the back of the session, there were these ladies, about 5 ladies, and they were talking about how they had been cured of high blood pressure. So the doctor who was facilitating the session was a consultant. And he said, please tell me how you cured yourself of high blood pressure, because I am very poor and I need to make money. So if I know what you did to cure yourself of high blood pressure, I can do that and send it to the NHS. Why do you think he said that? Because you can't cure high blood pressure. Once you have high blood pressure, you have it for life. You can only manage it by taking the medication. But these women, 5 of them, I'm telling you, they said they had cured high blood pressure and they weren't taking their medication anymore. Please and please and please. This is my general appeal now. If you're taking any medication, please don't stop it. Particularly without medical advice. Now I know. We have traditional forms of medication, and sometimes they work even better than a modern medication. I understand that. But please let your doctor know. Don't stop your medication. Now, these 5 women, at any point in time, because they took their blood pressures, and one of the ladies, her blood pressure was about 170 something. That's very high. So the sad part is, she probably would have been just going around, and one day she would have a stroke. And then she would never have even known about it. So please and please. And then we look at lifestyle factors. Currently, obviously, the traditional meals, they tend to be healthier. But we all know we live in the UK. We all eat pizzas on a regular. I am not pointing any fingers. We all eat fish and chips and all these processed food. And at the end of the day, it increases our likelihood of gaining more weight. Now, there's so much research around obesity and how it can lead to dementia. And obviously presents an increase in risk factors. So it's worth letting you know this as well. And unbalanced lack of exercise. Currently, we don't really walk, unless because you've got a dog or you've got kids and then you're taking them out. But for the most majority of people, we don't really exercise as much these days. And then excessive smoking and alcohol intake. And I always reference this. I had a friend and we were talking about reducing alcohol. And she told me, oh, I've drastically reduced my alcohol. I don't even drink as much these days. I used to drink 5 bottles and now I drink 1. And I went to her house and I saw the glass. And I couldn't even believe that glass. I wish I could have bought one of it and carried it across. That glass would have been like this. So she said, now I only drink 1. And that 5 bottles could have easily gone into it. Please, it's not about the glasses that you're taking, it's the quantity that you're taking. Right? Please do not be misled by, like my friend. How's there? Okay. So now I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that I have just mentioned, for instance. And number 1 question is, what do you think we can do to reduce our risk of getting dementia? I've spoken to you about the risk factors, so what do you think we can do? Oh, okay, good answer, lose weight. Individually, collectively, doesn't matter. Because the answers would be the same.
Just to reduce air pollution.
Oh, no. Within your control. You know what? I have to change the slides and add within your control.
Do not smoke.
No? Okay, that's good. Thank you, Derek. Yes, do not smoke. Lose weight. Anything else? More exercise. Wonderful. Correct response. Okay. Anything else? No. Okay. Thank you. No alcohol. I was gonna say if my friend was here, she would tell you. She would tell you. Anything else? Pardon? Yes. Eat fresh fruit. Very good. Fruits and vegetables, and a lot of fiber. Yes. Absolutely. Anything else? Good. Reduce stress. Because sometimes that's one of the big things. We're so stressed. Living in the economy these days. Pardon? Yes, difficult. That's true, but we have to try. We have to try. You can't completely avoid it, but you have to try. Yeah. Mhm. That's a very good question. I know that there's a lot of correlation between people who particularly work many hours a day and their stress level and how that impacts their mental health. Particularly with dementia, I don't think so. But we know that for a lot of people who work in a high stress, high pressure environment, they're likely to have having poor mental health. There's so much research on that. And what we are finding, people who live with untreated depression have, I think it's about 15% increase in getting dementia. So untreated depression and isolation as well. So let me continue now. And I think it's what everyone has said. There's not much to be said. It's exercise regularly. Good answer. It was as if you were there when I was writing these slides. And then maintain a healthy, oh, she's gone, but she said that. Stop smoking. Good. That was very. Keep alcohol within recommended limits. You said that. So keep your blood pressure under control. That's really good. So treatments available for dementia. Currently, there's no cure at this time, but there are some medications. They are still being trialed, but what they have shown is that they have their disease modified, so they can change because of dementia. And then we have other approaches, so non-pharmacological approaches, like some of the arts therapy that we're very good with sometimes. We also have cognitive stimulating therapy and a whole lot of other therapies. So now let's go through some of the myths, because sometimes people tell me this. So someone has actually told me, how come I never saw it back home? So let's go back to Hong Kong. Did you ever see anyone with dementia in Hong Kong? Several people, you would say. So it's natural for old people to act like that. Sometimes people think that if you're living with dementia and you're getting older, yeah, it's fine. That's how old people are. That's not true. Dementia is not growing old. It's not even related to growing old. It only affects white people. Someone told me that. Yes. I went to a community event and then someone came and told me, honestly, it only affects white people. I said, no, it's not affecting white people.
佢應該仲有10分鐘內啊。
And then someone
我同佢講，因為佢呢場次開始咗，但係我再 check 一 check 佢去到幾多，佢嘅 page，我會出嚟。
in my country, I never saw it. So when I came to the UK and I started working in a care home, everyone had yeah. And then someone told me, I thought my mom was possessed. So, and again, dementia only affects people's memories. It doesn't really affect people's memories. It affects their whole body. So, if you have some of these myths in your community, have you identified it? Why do you think we have it? The regrets start wrapping up? Okay, I'm almost at the end of my slides. I think it's because they have probably never ever seen dementia. There's very poor awareness about dementia. So what should you do if you suspect a loved one has dementia? I think one of the first things is that you start to have a conversation around your concerns. Please, it has to be done in a very compassionate and empathetic manner. It's not by going to tell the person, hey, you have dementia. Nobody would actually even listen to you if you go that way. So we have a way that you have to talk to people about it in a very sensitive manner. And you have to inform their GP. Now sometimes there are certain things. So for instance, you need to ask their consent. So they need to have told you, yes, I want you to do this for me. In some cases, if someone tells you, no, there's very little that you can't do at that point in time, but obviously you have to try and revisit it at various points in time. And keep a diary, as I was saying earlier. So start to write some of the symptoms that you've been seeing and the concerns that you have. And then we start talking about life planning. So start looking at, okay, who you are at this point in time, who are you? Start documenting about the person's life. Because over time, when they don't have their memories, it becomes very difficult to continue to support them. Where can you find support? Your GP, your local council, they can also support you, and carers organizations, and then obviously my service. So I'm just going to talk about what type of support is available. The support is very much based on the needs of the person. There's so much support, but it depends on where the individual is at and what exactly they need. Now, different organizations will come in at various points in time to support the person. It also depends on the needs of the main family carer. So whoever it is who's supporting the person, that person also has to be supported as well. Dementia just doesn't affect the person who's diagnosed, it affects everyone who's being served. And then there's also a lot in terms of benefits and what have you. But I'm just going to talk about our clinic. So we have a Chinese abnormal nurse service. It's run by my wonderful colleague Emily. I'll send it to her video for you. But I only saw her yesterday, so she said I'm not going to be able to. But she did say extend my regards to everyone there. So we have dementia support for Chinese communities. We get to talk to Emily, Kay, and their other team members. And we talk to them about any and everything that's related to dementia. You can ask about advice, support, and what have you. It's a it's not going on. So it's a 1 hour, 45 minutes to 1 hour clinics. You can talk to them about everything that you need. So if you want to get more information, please, you can email at Chinese clinics for more information. I think I'll end there. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. If you want the simplified version, please let me know. If you want that. No, it's virtually the same, except that one's simplified. Thank you. You're here now. Derek was giving me
I think that I got. We have a little bit.
let me take a picture.
Hey, so funny for you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Hãy subscribe cho kênh Ghiền Mì Gõ để không bỏ lỡ
Thank you, Derek.
我幫你 set 個場地嗰度。
我兩張兩三張，因為 Rory 都要。
我 set 好啦，好唔好？呢個邊可以用？
喺呢度。阿 Rory 啊，好。
阿爺真係。
好嗱，香港人身份，外界講過嘅就喺度啊。啱啱食飯睇咗。
有冇上網報名？佢有報名，有香港嘅俾我數一數啊，唔緊要，如果有條關嘅上邊。
我應該由呢個
順便聽埋冇問題，我揾最緊要最緊要包括填咗份陣間唔會有個 QR code 出嚟到出口，係啦，嗰份卷係幾個選擇題，係最緊要包括之後啲完先。
呢度啊。
送上去咧，呼吸就係希望。
文化講座嘅差唔多開始㗎啦，跟住勞工法例嘅就喺樓上嚇，你。呢有飯。海南雞飯我想講揚州炒飯，海南雞飯
冇人贊助有冇人贊助？
有公眾乜，
係邊間？係啊，風
個膠盒嗰啲。
唔好意思，呢度嘅
係所以
邊個係呢啲啊？
誒，
雞飯係邊個？
雞飯唔係呢啲，總之
哦
麵係呢啲嘅。